Seems you set it running free when we're apart to taste your beating heart. Alright. Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. This is the first time, literally the first time that I've had to film for weeks. My semester started and then my clinic assignment started, and I am working with elementary school children this semester, which is my least favorite population. I'm just not great with elementary school kids. I think I would do better with like middle school or high school, but the really little ones, they just seem like aliens to me and I don't know how to handle them. So anyway, it's been a lot because I have 18 of them across 9 different sessions throughout the week, and they're pretty short sessions, but that's a lot of prep work. So this is the first time that I've had to film in quite some time. The last video I filmed was the end of July, and now it is almost the end of September. Oh man. Anyway, because this is the first chance I have had to film in quite some time, I would like to do what I'm going to be calling a quickfire catch up, because I have a spreadsheet wherein I track all of the books that I read in a year. I started doing this in 2015. And when I am inputting a book that I've finished into that spreadsheet, I bold the title to tell me that I haven't yet talked about it on this channel. And I was going back and I was realizing that there were books that their titles were still bolded in the 2018 tab. So basically, I am just going through and going to quickfire mention, give a little bit of thoughts, although if it's been like 2 years, who knows what I'm going to remember about them. Just my thoughts on some things that I read and never mentioned to you guys. So the first of these is an interesting one. It is called Girls and Boys. It was written by Dennis Kelly, but it was read by an actress whose name I can't remember, but she did a really good job with the reading of it. The thing is, I don't think I actually liked the play very much. It's a one-woman play, and it was done on like Audible Originals, I think, and I got it for free in their like monthly subscription picks. I thought that it was read really well, but it's, I don't know if people will care about spoilers, but it's just like about a woman who marries a dude and then he turns out to be violent, like, shocker. I thought it was well written, but just not necessarily something that everyone needs to read. On that theme, the next thing I read was Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne. Oh boy, does Jules Verne know how to go off on tangents. Like, his pacing is all over the map. It's not very good. And the story just made no fucking sense. So I gave it 2 stars. I think it was probably an interesting work in its time, but I don't think people now need to be reading it. The only reason I got through it was because, again, it was an audiobook and it was read by Tim Curry. And I will just listen to anything that Tim Curry wants to tell me, but I didn't love it. Okay. Next is Through the Dark by Alexandra Bracken. This is a collection of short stories. Honestly, I own this one in physical copy, but it's all the way in the other room and I don't feel like getting up. So you're getting a picture. What did I give this? 3.5 stars. I definitely remember liking it. The stories were pretty long. These were like companions and slight sequels to the, what was it called? The Darkest Minds series. And I really loved the Darkest Minds series, so it was nice getting these little snippets. I think one of them I didn't super care about because it was characters I didn't super care about, but I think the rest of them I ended up really liking. Oh my god, I can't believe I've never talked about this. Next is Juliet Takes a Breath by Gabby Rivera. This one I lent out to a friend. I haven't gotten it back yet from them, but it is about a queer Puerto Rican girl. I think she's like 18 maybe, basically comes out to her very conservative family and then immediately leaves the next day for an internship with this like white queer feminist who lives in Portland. It was set, I want to say, in like the early 2000s, and it definitely was a very interesting look at the sort of queer discourse in the year of like, I want to say it was like 2003 or 4 or something. Because I think a lot of people don't quite realize how much the queer experience has changed in the last like 15 years. Like a lot has changed. But yeah, it had some really interesting things to say about white feminism and appropriation, and some really interesting things to say about like the landscape of being queer at that period of time, even in an area that is said to be as liberal as Portland is, although we have seen some protests about that recently. So just think about it. Anyway, there was a line from this that I have used on another one of my friends, which was she's getting her first like gay haircut. And if you're straight, listen, it's a thing. If you're gay, you know exactly what I'm talking about, the like first gay haircut. And she's sitting down with her hairstylist at this like wild party full of all these like fabulous queer people of various genders and, you know, sexualities and all that. And she says something about how, like, I don't want my hair to look too lesbian or something like that. And he says, well, are you a lesbian? And she said, yes. And he said, well, then any hair that you have is a lesbian haircut. And I've literally used that on one of my lesbian friends. Anyway, this book is really interesting. I think it has a lot to say. It's very emotional. I really liked it. I read it a few years ago, but I would definitely consider reading it again. Moving right along is Library of Fates by Aditi Khorana. I gave this 3 stars, but to be honest, I barely remember it. It was something about a girl being chosen to be the like caretaker of this magical library, which involves like leaving the life that she's known, and she tries to like change people's destinies, maybe, and it doesn't go super well. I think that's all I remember. I remember liking it. It just really hasn't stuck with me. Okay, next is Crown of Wishes by Roshani Chokshi. I liked this one. I don't think I liked it as much as the first one. The first one was a lot quicker for me to get through, whereas Crown of Wishes, I just kept finding myself like putting it down and then forgetting about it for a while and then being like, oh, right, yeah, I guess I should read that. So yeah, I gave it 3 stars. It's like a companion to, what was it? Star-Touched Queen? Yeah, where did I put that? I don't know where that is. Anyway, I used to live here. Star-Touched Queen, right? Yes. And it's like her younger sister is now grown up and gets like transported to basically fairy and goes through like a series of challenges. It was decent, but you know. And then the last for 2018, before we start getting into the 2019 stuff, is Diary of a Hounslow Girl by Abreen Razia. This was another like one-woman play that I got through Audible. I found it to be very predictable in its story. I don't remember a ton about it other than just the sort of generals, which is that it's about like a Muslim girl living in a specific area of London that's known as Hounslow, I guess, is a neighborhood. And she's like a high school girl, and so she's having all of her just like high school drama. I found it, you know, fairly predictable, but it was decent. I apparently gave it 3 stars. So moving on to 2019. The first book that I have somehow managed to not talk about yet is Girls of Paper and Fire by Natasha Nyan. I wanted to like this one more than I did because, you know, it's queer Asian fantasy, specifically like queer lady Asian fantasy. I liked the idea of it. I liked some aspects of the execution with the world building. I felt like the plot wasn't super, what's the word I'm looking for? Well crafted. But I like some things about it. I don't know what people are saying about the sequel, but if they're liking that possibly more than the first one, I might read it. The next one is American Panda by Gloria Chow. I really liked this one. I gave this one 4.5 stars. I think this one was almost on my top 5 of the year, and yet I've never talked about it. It is a contemporary young adult novel, not quite a romance, more of a coming of age, about this young girl who is she's like a freshman in college, and she's the daughter of Taiwanese immigrants. I'm trying best to describe what I really liked about this one, and I'm struggling, but there was just something really genuine and warm in the books, even though there is some really sort of intense family drama stuff that ends up happening. I just remember feeling like very cozy by it. Okay, so next is Beowulf by who knows, but translated by Seamus Heaney, I think. This was my first time actually reading Beowulf. I'd been assigned it in college, and then I didn't read it because I was a terrible student. that combination of generalized anxiety and undiagnosed, unmedicated ADHD that just really made me so reliable. Anyway, Beowulf. I really liked some of it, and I liked how it felt very classic, but also very accessible, I guess, even though, you know, it's like so old that it has to be translated into modern English. Yeah, there were things about it that I really enjoyed. I loved the sense of oral tradition and that this is a story that is millennia old, practically, that we are still able to access. I did get a little lost at some points because there's like story within a story, and the story within a story goes on for a really long time, and I started to get lost about what was happening in the story within a story, and then we kind of came back to the real story, and I was just like, oh right, what was happening with this? So like the pacing is a little odd, but you know, I still enjoyed it. Okay. Next is House of Binding Thorns by Aliette de Bedard. This I also gave 4.5 stars. I've mentioned this series before, so I'm not going to talk too much about this one, but it is book 2 in a trilogy. I now own the 3rd one, though I haven't read it yet. And it's like queer urban fantasy set in like war-torn Paris with like fallen angels and immortals and this mixing of like Vietnamese mythology with the like Judeo-Christian mythology. Super cool. Oh man, okay. Some of these I haven't talked about because they're just like weird one-offs, and I didn't know how to get them into like another themed video because I don't really do like wrap-ups anymore. So this is one of these, which is Wolf in White Van by John Darnielle, who I think is like the guy who's the lead singer of the Mountain Goats. This one is weird. It's a novel about a guy who, it's told very non-linearly. It's told where he keeps like going back to scenes and then like multiple times, and each time he goes back to this memory he'll like add more to it. So the story unveils in a like, there's sort of a present timeline and there's also this past timeline, and he keeps kind of moving back and forth. But it is about a man who in the current timeline is living with a very disfigured face, and we sort of find out the story behind that as we go on. It was a weird one. I think I liked it. I love how I say that so skeptically. Yeah, I gave it 3.5 stars. I don't know how else to talk about that one. So, make your own decisions. Alright, next up is Nevernight by J. Kristoff. Yeah, this one is in the other room. I should get some of these, right? Okay. Okay, so the next on the list is Nevernight by J. Kristoff. I can't decide if I liked this one or not. Here's the thing. I liked it by the end in spite of itself. Like, it did a lot of things to try to get me to be fed up with it, but yet by the end I still liked it. So, how many stars did I even give this? 4. Okay. Yeah, so this author does a lot of footnotes. And some of the footnotes are fine because they're like little historical bits about the world and stuff like that. And I am a nerd. I love that stuff. But some of the footnotes are just obnoxious, breaking the fourth wall in a way that's just very like editorializing. And I don't appreciate it. Okay, here's an example. So the scene is that they're at a hanging, and she's like 7 or something, and her father's being hanged in front of her. And someone says, "Make him dance!" The girl didn't know what they'd meant. She could hear no music, with an asterisk, footnote. She didn't know how to listen yet. You people seldom do. Like, okay, fuck you. And then like on the literal next page, it says, "But not one person noticed. Not one person cared," with a little asterisk. And then, "Something noticed, something cared." Okay. So anyway, here's the thing. I really love magic schools, particularly if they're like magic assassin schools. And so some of the tropes were delightful enough that I ended up really liking this book, even though there were a lot of things where I was just like, okay, male author, get over yourself. On an entirely different note, the next on the list is Emma. This is a physical copy of it. Specifically, I did the Audible drama version of Emma, which had a full cast, including Emma Thompson. If you have discovered that you like the story Emma because you saw that movie that came out like at the beginning of quarantine, you should check out the Audible drama because it's delightful. You should listen to it. That's all I've got to say on that one. Okay. Next was The Summer of Jordi Perez, which was a queer contemporary young adult romance. It was cute. I'm just a little bit over young adult romances. Like, I prefer my characters to be adults rather than teenagers. But it was still very cute. Next is Trouble Never Sleeps by, who is it? Stephanie Tromley. This was the final book in the, what was those called? Do I still have those? Shoot, what was that called? The first one was We Used to Be Friends, I think. Anyway, it's like very Veronica Mars inspired, but with like a boy PI, and his female long-suffering best friend, but they have tension and they solve murder mysteries. It is very charming in a teen hijinks sort of way, and I did end up really enjoying the series. I didn't take them too seriously, but they're fun to just kind of throw back, you know? Next is Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. This was written in Japanese, translated to English, about a woman who works a part-time job at a convenience store, and she has a lot of difficulty with social interactions in a way that we would maybe describe as on the autism like spectrum, but you know, that's never really specified. And it is a weird little book about this like dude starts working there and they get into this weird relationship. I don't know how else to talk about this one. It was interesting, but it was strange. Next is going to be The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. I gave this one 4 stars. I really enjoyed this one. I feel like the ending maybe wrapped up a little neatly, but it was still just a really lovely coming of age story. Absolutely do this one on audiobook, because it is a like poetry novel. And the main character is a poet, and the author reads the poetry in a way that is just really beautiful and feels like the way it's supposed to be read. So definitely recommend her audiobooks. Next up is Akata Warrior by Nnedi Okorafor. This is the second and final book in a quick little series. The first one is Akata Witch, and they are like an urban fantasy set in Nigeria with a big like mix of characters, including like the main character was born in Nigeria and then they moved to the United States for a lot of her upbringing, and then she ends up coming back. There's a guy who was like born and raised in Chicago that's then come there, and then there's 2 kids I think that have been raised in Nigeria for the whole time. So there's just this, they form this kind of like adventure party, honestly, because the main character realizes that she has these magical powers, which brings her into this society of the leopard people, which are the people that can like see spirits and do magic. And her like 3 leopard people teenage friends form out their like little adventuring party, and they have to defeat monsters and save the world. Next is The Talented Mr. Ripley by Patricia Highsmith. This book is so gay. I don't understand how it's so gay. I have never seen the movie. This was my first like real experience with the story. Yeah, these men are so obsessed with each other. And then they like have the audacity to be offended that it might be taken as gay. Bro. I enjoyed it a lot, and is honestly, but I also just enjoy serial killer novels. Also, the main character is like just so delightfully nonplussed. Like, the thing that he's annoyed about when he has to kill someone is just that like, ugh, but it's such a waste, and I had plans. I don't want to have to deal with a murder, but fine. You know? Okay, next is Scythe by Neil Shusterman. What did I give this one? 4 stars? Really? Okay. Yeah, I've heard people not loving the third one of this series, so I don't know if I'm gonna read on past the first one, but I did really enjoy the first one. It's a, like, futuristic, not really post-apocalyptic, like, but somewhat dystopian world in which technology is advanced to the point where no one dies, and so there's this class of jobs called Scythes, and their job is to ritualistically kill people in order to still have a society with death, even though no one dies. So, yeah, you can probably imagine how that might get a little fucked up. Anyway, Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman is the next one. I enjoyed this one. I didn't know a ton about Norse mythology, so it was nice to get sort of like an overview of some of the more famous stories. I don't mind having things read to me by Neil Gaiman. He is a very good reader. But yeah, I thought that they were fine. The next is City of Blades by Robert Jackson Bennett. I do have this one, actually. So City of Blades is book 2 in the... what is the overarching series title of this? I don't know. The first book is called City of Stairs. And if you have read and enjoyed the 100,000 Kingdoms series by N.K. Jemisin, I would definitely recommend this series. It has a similar vibe of like the rise and fall of divinity, of like murder mystery. Every book in the trilogy has a different point of view character, and that each book takes place several years after the last one, so they each have a very different focus, kind of similar to the 100,000 Kingdoms. So yeah, I haven't read the third of these yet, but given how much I really enjoyed the first two and how it is this kind of each one is its own separate story, I'm really hoping that the third one will be as good. What's next? Oh, Jade War by Fonda Lee. I've talked about Jade War. Oh no, I talked about the first one. Right, Jade War is the second one. What was the first one? City of Jade? Yeah, Jade City. Okay. The pacing on this one is super different to the pacing of the first book, because I think the first book takes place in the space of like a week, maybe like 2 weeks, whereas Jade War takes place over like months and years. So it's a very different feeling to the first book, but it is still super interesting. We get a lot of different stories in this one. Like, it takes place in a lot of different areas, unlike the first one, again, which was very localized to the city. This one expands a lot more. There were parts of it that I really enjoyed. There were parts that were somewhat emotionally devastating, but I really need to know what this third book is going to do, because I don't know if my heart can take it. Okay, next is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. I'm torn on how to talk about this one, because it is very beloved on BookTube. And I didn't hate it, but I didn't really love it either. So I don't really want to get attacked. I don't know. It was just weird for me in that I have very little experience with Chinese stories, and that I really have only watched a few like historical Chinese dramas. But even so, I could kind of feel that this felt like a Chinese American story rather than a Chinese story. Just like the way that people talk to each other. It feels like an American young adult way of speaking to each other, which isn't to say it was bad. It just, I don't know. I didn't love it. I liked it. Parts of it were, you know, obviously horrifying because they're based off of real atrocities that happened in war. I can't decide if I'm gonna read the rest of this series. I might wait to see how people feel once this trilogy is done and see what people's feelings about the overall series is. Because there were things that I liked about it and things that I didn't, and yeah, I want to see what the balance is. I have this little pile of pretzels over here. It's time for a snack. I don't know if you guys can hear, there's a bunch of dogs barking outside. Anyway, okay, next one here is An Artificial Night by Shauna Maguire. I don't remember which one this is. It's a book in her Rosemary and Rue series, or whatever it's called. It's set in the Bay Area, which I do enjoy. It's like an urban fantasy with fairies, set in like San Francisco, which is charming to me. But they blur together, and I don't remember. Okay, next is one that I actually have right here. Let's maybe move these. Alright. Next on the list is The Hanging Tree by Ben Aronovich. This is the 6th. It's the 6th book. So I probably shouldn't say a ton about this one, except that I really enjoyed it. This was a reread for me. It was my second time because I was doing a reread of the whole series in preparation for Lies Sleeping, which is the most recent one that I haven't... Actually, I think there might be one newer, but they've started releasing them in hardback, and all of mine, as you can see, are mass market paperback, so I have to wait like a year until they come out in mass market paperback to buy them now. So, cool. Anyway, I don't think there's supposed to be that many more in the series, hopefully not, because I feel like he's gonna run out of story at a certain point. But there's some like big, like overarching plot shit that goes down in this book. In fact, it's honestly more of a book about the Faceless Man, which is sort of the overarching evil that we've had like brushes with before. It's like more about him than it is about the like individual case that they're solving. So I really liked this one. I am very invested to see where this series goes. This is a great urban fantasy series set in London, has a lot of cool magic and creatures and stuff. Okay, next is Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. Oh boy, did I love this book, and oh boy, should you maybe not read it right now if you've never read it before, because it is about a flu-like virus that comes to North America from China and causes a worldwide pandemic that wipes out the vast majority of the world's population. So, boy, am I glad I read this in 2019. Honestly, even with that, it is such a gentle, soft apocalypse. Like, it's devastating, but it's never particularly violent because it's about a troupe of like musicians and actors who travel around between these like settlements performing Shakespeare. Oh, it's so gorgeous, but also now is not the right time. Okay, next is The Tethered Mage by Melissa Caruso. I really thought that this was going to be a queer fantasy between like the two main female characters because they're like soul bonded and shit. Like, come on! But no. And I don't even really like the dude that's the main love interest. So yeah, I thought there were parts of this one that were fun in terms of the magic system. There's like these sources that are like touched with magic, but because they're really volatile, they're like kept in the muse because, you know, locking people with power up in essentially a prison is always a good idea. And so the setting is very like fantasy Renaissance Venice. So it's gorgeous, and there's all these canals, and, you know, there's politicking and intrigue and lots of fun stuff. Yeah, I was honestly just disappointed that the romance wasn't what I was looking for. Next on here is Mooncakes, which is a delightful little graphic novel. I think I've lent this one out to a friend because I don't see it on my graphic novel shelf. But it's by Wendy Zhu and Susanna Walker. And it's just a wonderful little queer fantasy graphic novel about a witch who meets up with their childhood best friend, who is now, or was then as well, I don't know, is a werewolf. And there's like a little mystery, and because it's a graphic novel, it like ends kind of abruptly, but it's so cute. Anyway, you should read it. It's delightful. So next on here is Certain Dark Things by Silvia Moreno Garcia. I lent this out to a friend, so I don't have it. Because this is what happens. I read a book like a year ago, and then I'm like, hey, friend, you should read this. And then I lend it out, and then a global pandemic happens, and you don't see your friends anymore, so they can't give you the books back. Anyway, I really enjoyed this one. It is a vampire novel set in Mexico City, in a world where people know about vampires. And there are all these different like types of vampire, including a type that is like descended from the Nahuatl people, which are like indigenous to Mexico. Very interesting and cool vampire mythology that I was really into. This one had kind of a weird abrupt ending, but other than that, I thought the story was super cool. So last of 2019, this video is going to be so long, guys, I'm sorry. So last of 2019 is My Sister the Serial Killer by Oyen Can Braithwaite. This was a book that I read on New Year's Eve before midnight, and remember how I was saying earlier with Talented Mr. Ripley that I love serial killers? Well, I still love serial killers. It's literally about a girl who works as a nurse and her younger sister, who is like the more popular, more beautiful one, etc., always has these like shitty boyfriends, and then she ends up murdering them. But she like keeps getting away with it. It is a very short little novel. I highly recommend it. It's amazing. Okay, so we're into the 2020 shit now. The first one that I read is Bloomin' to You by Neo Nakatani, I think? Nakatani Neo, my bad. Although if that's written in the English style, then Neo is actually probably her last name, so it should be read first in the Japanese style, but anyway, whatever. Not the point. This is a cute little female-female romance manga. It is volume 1 in a series, and so because it's volume 1, it really doesn't get very far. So I'm curious about how the rest of the story goes, but at the moment I don't remember it very well because not a ton happened in that volume. Okay, next is Wishful Drinking by Carrie Fisher. This is a book adaptation of her one-woman show, which I actually had the privilege of seeing live when I was fairly young. So a lot of this was familiar to me, but in a way where I hadn't experienced it since I was really young, and seeing her, you know, live and in person, it brought back a lot of feelings for me, obviously with Carrie Fisher passing away, and I want to, what year was it? Can't remember, if it was 2018 or possibly 2016? Was it 2016? Anyway, I get very emotional with things with Carrie Fisher and them for obvious reasons. Our beloved space mom, may she be floating in the stars looking down on us. Okay, next is Crota by Owl Going Back. This was a horror novel. I think it was published in the 80s at some point. I forget the exact year. I had some issues with this one. First of all, it just wasn't very scary because it was literally just like there was a creature, like there was a monster, and they had to kill it. It was a monster and it killed people by tearing them apart and eating them. And then they had to kill it. The end. You know, like it wasn't great. And like, they literally use the O word to describe a Filipina American woman. And I just wasn't really into it, you know? Like, I wasn't into it. Okay, the next is The Neuroscientist Who Lost Her Mind by Barbara K. Lipska. This, I think, is the only non-fiction... Or no, I have one more. Okay. I read this book for a class, which was a neurocognitive disorders class. We had to, like, do a write-up of a non-fiction book by a person with a neurogenic cognitive disorder. And so I wrote about a woman who she's a neuroscientist who studies schizophrenia and ended up getting tumors in her brain that created symptoms that mimicked the symptoms of schizophrenia. And it is written by her post, you know, cancer treatment, so it's not a surprise to say that she lived. But it was a really intense story. Clearly written by someone whose forte was neuroscience and not literature, but it was perfectly competently written, and a really interesting phenomenon. Okay, I somehow have the audacity to have The Thief for the Queen's Thief series by Megan Wayland Turner. I've lost count of how many times I've brought this series up on this channel, so no. Just really quickly, I've reread The Thief, Queen of Atolia, and King of Atolia. I am still working on Conspiracy of Kings and Thick of Thieves. The final book in the series comes out in October, like October 2nd or something. Like, it comes out really early, and I am going to lose my goddamn mind. Okay, next up is all of the KJ Charles books that I have read this year, which I mentioned, generally speaking, in my like mid-year catch-up, but I do want to do a quick rundown of the actual titles that I've read. The first one that I read was called Band Sinister. This one is a one-shot. She's a mix of like series and one-shots. So this one was a one-shot, and it is not fantasy. Some of hers have fantasy elements to them, but this one is very much like just a historical queer romance set in like the Regency period. And it is absolutely delightful. Then I read a trio of hers, which is like the Magpie Lord trio, I think, or the Magpie trio, I don't know. Anyway, the first book is The Magpie Lord, the second is A Case of Possession, and the third is A Flight of Magpies. And I really enjoyed these. They go down super easy. They are like magic and romance and the Regency period, and like it's like one person's like blood heritage mixing with another person's magic to like create this almost like mythical being, or anyway, it's really good. I enjoyed it a lot. There's like some spin-offs from that series, but they don't feature the characters that I actually care about, so I haven't read that yet. And the last KJ Charles is Spectred Isle, which is another like fantasy one, but this one's set more in like the 1920s, I think, and is the first in a series, but the rest of the series isn't out yet. And like with romance series, they're not like, you don't have to have the next one. It's its own complete story, but it would be nice to read more on in the series. If she puts it out, I'll read it. Next is The 100,000 Kingdoms by N.K. Jemisin. I have on here. I feel like I've talked about this one before. Yeah, I talked about it in my buy books. We're not talking about this one again. Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. I think maybe I mentioned that I read this one. I really liked this one. I think I gave it 3.5 stars. It is about a black woman living in modern day London. Yeah, this is a contemporary romance. And she is living with fibromyalgia, and she has this adorable budding romance with the guy who's like the supervisor of the building. And yeah, it's really charming. I did also read the sequel, Take a Hint, Danny Brown, and despite this one being like more like outwardly seemingly more for me, I didn't like this one as much. Like, the main character, Danny, is a bisexual witch. So I feel like I should be more into this one than I am. But there were a couple things that just I didn't love. One of which was that it does that thing where there's a character that's really into romance novels, and you're reading a romance novel, so you should buy into this character because you like romance novels and he likes romance novels. It's like when authors give their female protagonist of their YA series like a love of reading. You're reading a book. You will relate to a girl who likes to read books. I'm just like, all right, be more creative. Also, stop breaking the fourth wall. It's annoying. And also there was just a lot of like miscommunication, or just like not super healthy communication for a while that I just wasn't super into. Also, I might just be getting a little bit tired of contemporary romances. Like, I really think I'm more into the historical romances right now. So yeah, that's where I'm at. Oh, right. Speaking of, I read Once Ghosted, Twice Shy by Alyssa Cole, which was the one remaining novella of the Reluctant Royals series that I hadn't read yet. And it was the queer one, and the reason I put it off was because it felt a little bit like the token queer one. Which isn't like super fair, but is still how I felt, and is still a little bit how I feel. I liked it, but it was a novella, so you didn't really get like the depth that you do in the main novels. And I thought it was fine. I thought it was cute. And thank you all for sticking with me. We have one more book to get through. The last book that I haven't yet talked about reading on this channel is California Bones by Greg Van Eekhout. I have brought this book up a couple times as being unread and on my TBR. And look at me, I finally read something! Holy shit! I finally read a book that's been on my physical TBR for years. This is a delightful, like, urban fantasy, but historical fantasy, and that the world is much different, even though it's ours. It's set in a California that has magic and has seceded from the United States and broken up into the kingdoms of Northern California and Southern California. So this is set in a very different version of Los Angeles, and it's about people who are like combing the La Brea tar pits and the beaches of Santa Monica for the fossilized remains of these like extinct mythological magical creatures, and then like grinding them up and using them in alchemy. Like, it's rad as hell. And this book in the series is a fun little heist story. It's not very long, and it was delightful. The second book has like a different main character. It's set several years in the future. So I am very excited to see what the rest of the series is going to be like. But that is all that I have read so far this year that I haven't already talked to you guys about. There were fewer in 2020 because even with the few amount of videos I have been making. I have been reading very few things. Like, I have read 31 books so far this year, and by like mid-September, or even like through the end of September last year, how many had I read? 54. So, you know, that's how we're doing. How are y'all doing? I would love to know, I guess. Oh, that moment where I lost my mind, it showed up. Has it been here the whole time? Maybe. Oh boy. Anyway, I am being texted by a friend to go have a movie night, so I am going to sign off with y'all. Let me know how you've been doing lately, or just leave some hearts in the comments. And I will see y'all with another video. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye!